If you were starting out or just building a privacy program, which framework would you use? I mean, I know that we saw a lot of folks using SCCs, but what would you use first? And I'll start with Noel.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably use DPF I think, because DPF allows you to expand your transfers that you're doing without having to do any additional work, right? Once you certify, because it is principles based, if you're applying those principles to new transfers, then it's already included, right? Maybe you have to update what's included on your registration, but that's really it. Whereas like SCCs, if you're expanding the transfers, that means you have to execute another contract or update it, So I think that's maybe an easier one. But of course, if you're not subject to FTC jurisdiction, you can't participate in it, then I would, then I think you'd look at SCCs.
I do think that there is an aspect of understanding what kind of business you run. Like if you run a very straightforward, I don't know, non-online retail business kind of situation, and your data flows are very, very limited, and you can comply with the SCCs, I think that that's fine. I do think as long as you're in tech or similar fields, the SCCs will continue to be challenging. I know we've had to do a lot of work to make sure that we align with the requirements. And on top of everything else, they do pose these like challenges around compliance and alignment with MSAs, NDAs, etc. And I don't know, Lupe, but I will ask a live question to Lupe. Maybe she can answer this question for me because it just occurred to me and I never thought of it. But I don't even know if you can be more restrictive than the SCCs. So like if your DPA is in conflict by being more restrictive than the SCCs, does that also get overwritten because the SCCs just take precedence as a whole, which would be an outlandish thing. But now that I think about it, I'm like, maybe I should just defer to the SCCs in some contract.
In principle, they will always prevail. So SCCs will prevail even if it is more restrictive what the DPA is saying. I mean, but in principle, the SCCs are going to prevail. What the European Commission says is like, okay, the DPA, data processing agreement, or the MSA can add more details. So for example, in data breaches, the SCCs are going to say that you have to notify data breach without undue delay. And then in the agreement, you can say within 48 hours and giving this information and whatever. That is not a conflict. But if you have like a conflict between, for example, liability provisions and stuff like that, I mean, SCCs in principle are prevailing there.
Lupe, has there been any case law about that? I think that that's a really interesting point that Beatrice brings up. I mean, nearly no company that I've ever been at, nor any vendor, only gives out SCCs, right? It's always affixed to an Article 28 compliant DPA, whether or not it's for Article 28 anymore, because people use DPAs that were, they might not know it, but it was founded under the basis of GDPR's Article 28, and probably prior to that, really, with the directive. But even in California, they use it. So when somebody has a DPA that covers data processing, further details, et cetera, that is in contradiction, have courts actually made a determination about what happens? Have they actually made that call, or is it just sort of a plain text interpretation?
I mean, it's more interpretation from regulators. I'm not aware of any case law where this has ended up in court and they have taken a decision. If you go, the European Commission published some Q&A with the new SCCs, and they believe that this can be used as a standalone document. I don't know a single company that uses this as a standalone document. I mean, it always goes together with a commercial agreement, with a DPA or something, because also before you need to have a DPA because they didn't have the language of control to processor agreements. So if you go to a European Commission, I mean, they're very clear. I mean, this has to prevail with over any provision in any commercial agreements, and commercial agreements can only like somehow supplement, but not being in conflict with it. I'm not aware of any case law, but the regulatory point of view and the European Commission point of view is like they will prevail. And usually you have that stipulation in the agreement. So in case of conflict, it's going to prevail.